This one's a tough one. I think, again, some of the presentations that come from outside the area draw on cliches and stereotypes. One I'm thinking of is the kids show, the Smurfs. They're all little blue people. But so they each have a little distinguishing mark, and one of them talks like the way I'm talking right now, the way I grew up talking to Southern West Virginia. This is the way that Smurf talks, and it's clumsy Smurf. And that's the reason you know he's clumsy, is because he talks the way I'm talking right now. You know, that's the stereotype in many people's minds still. I said, you know, and I've had, you know, I did a reading from my novel Saints and Villains, which is set in Nazi Germany. And a professor came up to me afterwards and said, a professor from out of state, who came up to me and said, you really shouldn't read from that book. You don't have the right accent. And I was like, so, you know, so it's some of those encounters. The place I encountered it in my work, and even had some problems in terms of students' reactions and so forth, with my novel, Unquiet Earth. And this was a real hard thing for me because I'd written these two characters who, because they showed up at the end of Storming Heaven, were related and were cousins. And when I began writing the Unquiet Earth, they started falling in love. And I'm like, no, you can't fall in love. You know, you're cousins. We don't do that here. You know, act like a stereotype. And I literally got writer's block for 6 months because they insisted they were in love, and I was insisting they couldn't be. And one thing I've learned over the years is you do not boss your characters. If you try to boss your characters, they are going to go on strike. so they went on strike for a while. And I finally realized that, I started reading about other places and realized that, in Jane Austen, first cousins are getting married all the time. They, this is upper class stuff in England. It wasn't anything to be ashamed of, to be in love with your first cousin or to marry your first cousin. You're keeping all that lovely money in the family in England. And I realized that the only, it's a total cultural stereotype that these two couldn't fall in love. And it was wrecking my writing, this stereotype, and it was wrecking their relationship. And actually what I ended up doing was turning it on its ear because they did fall in love and they acted on that. But it does wreck the relationship because one of them especially is so obsessed with and knows so much about that stereotype and what it means that she finally can't deal with the relationship anymore. And so I tried to turn the stereotype into a way of showing how stereotypes can wreck people's lives. But I don't know what else to do with them other than to try to subvert them that way. This is really hard. I get a really good grip on this topic right now because of it.
Yeah, this is a tough one too. I don't have a lot on this. It's funny, I won't talk about stereotypes, it's all over that. I've dealt with it in movies. I like cleaners, I can laugh at that stuff, and I know you do too. It's brilliant writing. But cliche is an issue, and it's external cliche versus internal. And I was thinking about the internal, I grade 30, 40 scripts a year, and I consult with students like Terry and work with them, and I'm always battling cliche, just in story. As a writer myself, Bill and I write together, we battle for cliche, and we point those kinds of things out. But then I go back to, there's no criticism I have of the script. Like the performance last night, there was nothing cliche about. Everyone had a rich ending that was not cliche. So I really don't know how to address it, but I do want to say, we're trying to find the voice or a voice, and I work around the world. When I want to take one product to represent my state, I take the Unquiet Earth. It's the one book that I take to different places. This is the closest thing as I can to tell you the story of, so I'm glad you brought that book up.
Maybe sold you to be more Thomas.
Okay. Really, that the old saying goes that nothing's new under the sun. It's hard to stay away from cliche. Recently, I was hired by the Department of the Interior to work with the National Park Service to create an outline in the history of the area that's now called the New River National River, or New River National River. And anyway, what we did was we gathered up a lot of the people who had lived in that area when it was just a coal mine area. have another very good K-Moore and the New River Gorge in that area. And we interviewed about 23 people, took them back to the site, had them talk to us and said, yeah, I used to live right there, and nothing but bushes and gravel. And we interviewed 23 people, and then we put together a narrative of 7 chapters. And they asked me to, being a poet, they asked me to write a poem. This book is going to be published later this summer. And with a group from California, who is now published in the project. But they asked me to write a poem for each one of the chapters. And I started off by writing a poem about the New River Gorge, because it's the river that ran through. And I wrote one about the coal mines. I wrote one about picking blackberries. One about canning. But anyway, through the voices of these people who live there, these poems came very easy because I basically wrote poems that identified with their stories. And they're pleased with them. They said they're going to publish all the poems in the book. So there are ways around cliches, and that's going through the actual stories. And if they are cliches, they're just cliches. You know, cliches work sometimes.
Yeah, I agree. You have to remember, cliches became cliches because they have power. I mean, so you have to acknowledge that. You have to be really careful. I'm like Denise, I struggle with it all the time. Because they do have power. And you have to, it's very hard to stay out of that dilemma. I think when you talk about the cliche stereotypes, I kind of like the way Lee Painter now. He just gets them all out of the way real early. All right, I'm going to have your drunken moonshiner uncle in the hayloft with his niece's daughter. Just get it done and then go tell your story. So there's a couple ways to do it. When Irene was talking about class, I thought of Perry Larno, who wrote the Filmmaker, and Hunter Sworn, who had a very hard time getting those books published. They're incredible books, very good books. She had a very hard time getting those published because she was writing about the lower class in Kentucky. And she argued with publishers about that. There's a great line in the Hunter Sworn book where the guy, all her women characters are very strong, all her men characters. But so this guy's going to go out and start moonshine because he needs to have money, and then he spends all his money on hunting dogs. It's like, how are you doing this? But the kids in the family, they're feeding the dogs, and they're feeding the chicken dogs. Now, he won't let his pedigree eagles, the hunting dogs, feed chickens. But she has this great line which says they go out and feed the chicken bones to the other dogs. And they ask Mom, okay, well, can we feed them this? And Mom says, yeah. But them dogs ain't got no pedigree. They eat. And I think that's the metaphor for the class. That thread that runs through that whole book. It's really done. It's really good. So I agree. They're really tough to get around. It's a tough question.
The question of class is very, very significant in my mind at all times. I think because I have made most of my adult life, and will be most of my adult life for the foreseeable future, living outside of Washington, D.C. And I know every single day the difference between what's going on there and what I'm hearing from the rest of the country. And there's such a huge disconnect that this is something that I live with as a human being and feel responsible for every single day. And when I went, we're so flippant in some ways about the kids growing up today, because I think that all generations are kind of flippant about the generations that come after us. But I'm just getting to be old enough where I can be flippant, and And you know, we all talk about how they're all on the internet, and they're all on Facebook, and they all have this stuff, and, you know, but a lot of them don't. A lot of them here in West Virginia have no internet access whatsoever. They do not have the computers in their homes. You know, my home has, at last count, 3 computers. We have 2 iPhones and an iPad. And there are 3 people in my house. Okay? All right, we're obsessed. All right, okay, I'll do that. But, you know, these kids coming up are going to have to compete with kids coming out of, even dumb kids who are coming out of circumstances that have made them into something. And, you know, and West Virginia produces some of the very best and the very brightest, but it also is a truly testing ground. And a lot of people fall through the cracks. And that is something that I try to remember myself every day, that there are still people coming up through this world. And, you know, I had a friend on Facebook. I'll tell the story real quick, because I can't talk without telling the story. But I had a friend on Facebook that I had known from Philly, and I hadn't talked to her since I was 6. But, you know, so I think, you know, I connected with her, and she wrote back to me, and she said, "Oh, I am so excited that we're back in touch with you." And she said, "You have no idea how important your family was to me." I said, "Really? What did we do?" And she said, "Well, you know, you were these, you know, my father was a librarian, my mother was a teacher." She said, "You were these educated people, and yet you just loved my family the way you would love anyone." And I wrote back, I was floored by this, because I wrote back and I said, "See, when we went to your house, you guys were the coolest people alive. You had a goat, and we got to ride horses, and, you know, and it was just one of those moments where it reminds me once again that, you know, it really depends on where you are. And every memory, I told us, every memory I have of being in your family is a happy memory. And how often can you say that about people in your life? So I think that class really is the third rail of life, and at least American life. And anybody who wants to talk about that, that's fine with me.
I'll be very brief. I think we don't talk about class enough because it forces us, as a large group, not us, but as a nation, to look at the potential lie of meritocracy and the belief that everybody, if you just work hard enough, you will be able to get ahead. And that's a big old hot steamy pile. Okay, and